I kept the secret for 57 years, a secret that destroyed a man who swore to love me until death do us part, a secret that transformed me from a naive wife into a woman who learned to survive through silent revenge. Good morning, my dears. I'm Dorothy Anderson. I'm 84 years old, and today I'm going to tell you a story I've never fully shared with anyone, not even my children. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel. It's very important to me to know that my story is reaching people. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Is it from Texas, California, New York? I want to get to know all of you on the other side. I was born in 1940 in a small town in rural Kentucky, a time when girls like me had few dreams beyond finding a good husband and starting a family. And that's exactly what happened to me at 18 years old. In 1958, I met Harold at a church social. He was 25 years old, worked at the town's textile mill, and was considered an excellent catch. Tall, with an elegant posture, a well-trimmed mustache, and piercing brown eyes. My father was enchanted with him. "A man with a steady job," he'd say. "He'll give you a good life, Dorothy." And my mother would add, "A young lady can't be too choosy. Harold is hard-working and respectful." What more do you want? I wanted love, of course, but back then, love was something that grew over time. It wasn't necessarily the starting point, and Harold knew how to be charming when he wanted to be. He'd bring me wildflowers he picked on the way from the mill, write me little notes, and say my eyes were like two shining chestnuts. I'd blush, of course. I'd never received so much attention from a man. Our courtship lasted only 6 months. Soon came the engagement and then the wedding. A simple ceremony at the town's main church with a dress that my mother and I sewed together. I remember it drizzled that day, and everyone said it was a sign of good luck, that our marriage would be blessed with abundance. The first years were exactly what was expected of a newlywed couple back then. I took care of the house with all the care my mother had taught me. I cleaned, cooked, washed, ironed. Harold went to the mill in the morning and came back in the late afternoon. We'd have dinner together, chat a bit about the day, and then he'd listen to the radio while I embroidered or prepared clothes for the next day. In 1960, our first son, Thomas, was born. 18 months later came Mary, and in 1964, we completed our family with John, 3 children in 5 years of marriage. I barely had time to breathe between diapers, bottles, and all the household chores. But it was a life I accepted naturally. It's what all the women of my generation did. It's what was expected of us. Harold was a good provider. There was never a lack of food on our table. The children always had clean clothes and shoes on their feet. At birthday parties or Christmas, there was always a present for each one. From a material standpoint, we couldn't complain. We weren't rich, but we lived with dignity in our 3-bedroom house in the working-class neighborhood of town. But there was something that started to change around 1966. Harold began arriving home later and later from work. At first, it was just a few minutes, then an hour. Eventually, 2 or 3 hours late. The excuses were always the same. We had to finish an urgent order. The manager asked us to stay later. There was a problem with the machines. I believed him, or perhaps wanted to believe. A dedicated wife doesn't question her husband. That's what I'd been taught. My mother always said, a man has his business, a woman has hers. Don't meddle in your husband's affairs. But then, on a Monday in March 1966, something happened that would completely change the course of my life. I was washing clothes in the laundry sink in the backyard. Back then, we didn't have a washing machine. Everything was done by hand. I'd scrub the pieces with soap, rinse them, wring them out, and hang them on the line. When I picked up the white shirt Harold had worn on Sunday to go to church, I noticed something strange on the collar, a reddish stain. I brought it closer to my face to examine it better and smelled a perfume that wasn't mine. I only used lavender perfume that my godmother gave me every Christmas. That smell was different, stronger, more provocative. I scrubbed hard to remove the stain, but my mind was already working. A voice inside me said, "It's lipstick, Dorothy." It's lipstick from another woman. I tried to silence that voice. Harold wouldn't do this to me, not to the mother of his children. It must be something else. In the following weeks, I started paying more attention. Harold seemed more distant, less interested in the children, always in a hurry to leave the house in the morning and with excuses for arriving late. The smell of that strange perfume appeared more frequently on his clothes. And once, while ironing his pants, I found a folded note in the back pocket. My hands trembled as I opened that small piece of paper. It was written in delicate handwriting, clearly feminine. Yesterday was wonderful. Can't wait for Wednesday. With all my love, V. Who could V be? My heart raced. I felt a lump in my throat. The confirmation I feared was there in my hands. Harold, my husband, the father of my children, was betraying me, and from the tone of the note, it wasn't something recent or casual. It was an affair. I put the note back where I'd found it and spent the rest of the day in a kind of torpor. I prepared the children's lunch, cleaned the house, cooked dinner, all automatically, as if my body functioned separately from my mind, which was in complete chaos. That night, after putting the children to bed, I sat on the bed waiting for Harold to arrive. He entered the bedroom after 11, smelling of cigarettes and that perfume I now recognized. He pretended to be surprised to see me awake. "Still not asleep, Dorothy? Are you feeling ill?" I almost asked. Almost threw everything I knew in his face, almost screamed, cried, begged for explanations. But something stopped me. An internal voice, stronger than despair, told me to wait, to observe, to think. "I'm fine," I replied, "just waiting for you to get home so I could take my headache medicine." "I don't like getting up after lying down." He seemed relieved. He kissed me on the forehead, not on the mouth as he used to, and went to take a shower. As I listened to the sound of water falling, I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't confront Harold. Not yet. First, I needed to know more. Much more. The next morning, after Harold left for work, I went to Mrs. Sullivan's house, our longtime neighbor, a nearly 70-year-old lady who knew everyone in town and had eyes and ears attentive to everything. If anyone would know something, it would be her. "Mrs. Sullivan," I began carefully, "do you know anyone at the textile mill whose name starts with V? A woman, perhaps?" Mrs. Sullivan looked at me over her glasses, her perceptive eyes studying me. "Why do you want to know, Dorothy?" "I heard Harold mention that name a few times." "I think she's a new employee, and I'm thinking of making a cake for him to take to welcome her." Mrs. Sullivan didn't seem very convinced, but she answered anyway. "The only one I know at the mill with a name like that is Vera Morrison. Young woman, arrived about 8 months ago from the city, works as the manager's secretary. Pretty, you know. The kind who wears shorter skirts and red lipstick." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Vera, secretary to the manager. Red lipstick. Everything fit together. "Have you ever seen this woman with Harold?" Mrs. Sullivan hesitated. I realized she knew something more. "Dorothy, dear, I don't want to be the one bringing bad news." "Please, Mrs. Sullivan, I need to know." She sighed, placed her hand over mine. "I saw the two of them together at the Palace Theater last month. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I thought it was strange because it was during work hours. They were sitting in the back, very close together. I didn't want to say anything because, well, you know how it is. Sometimes we see things and prefer not to get involved in other people's lives. Wednesday, the same day mentioned in the note. I thanked Mrs. Sullivan and returned home with my mind seething. The confirmation was there. My husband was having an affair with the manager's secretary. They probably met every Wednesday, perhaps using the pretext of some meeting or extra work. That night, I cried hidden in the bathroom so the children wouldn't hear me. I cried for my naivety, for the betrayal, for the uncertain future. But when I looked at myself in the mirror, with red eyes and a swollen face, something inside me changed. A new determination arose. I won't be just another betrayed wife, I said to my reflection. I won't be the poor thing everyone will point at on the street and whisper about, "There goes Dorothy. Her husband left her for a younger woman." I won't make a scene. I'll do it my way. It was at that moment, in front of that mirror fogged by the steam from the hot shower, that I decided. I would pretend I knew nothing. I'd let Harold think I was the same naive and dedicated wife as always. But behind that facade, I would begin to plan something he would never expect. It wouldn't be an impulsive or scandalous revenge. It would be calculated, patient, meticulous. I would destroy Harold little by little, so slowly that when he realized what was happening, it would be too late. That night, I slept with surprising tranquility. For the first time in years, I felt I had control of my life. And that, my dears, was just the beginning of my transformation. The morning after that discovery, I woke up with a clarity I'd never felt before. As I prepared coffee for Harold, I observed him with different eyes. Every gesture of his, every forced smile, every distracted glance at the clock, everything now had a new meaning for me. "You're very quiet today, Dorothy. Did something happen?" he asked while spreading butter on his bread. "Nothing, dear. Just thinking about what to make for Sunday dinner. Your mother is coming to visit, remember?" He nodded, visibly relieved that I wasn't asking questions about his delays or the smell of perfume on his clothes. Poor thing. He thought I was so simple, so predictable. Little did he know that behind my calm smile, a storm was forming. After Harold left for work, I sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil. Like a general planning a battle, I began to outline my strategy. It wouldn't be an impulsive revenge, one of those that causes a big momentary scandal and is then forgotten. It would be something that would permanently change the balance of power between us. I divided my plan into 3 phases. The first would be to gain Harold's complete trust, making him believe I would never suspect him. The second would be to start subtly sabotaging his professional life and his affair with Vera. The third would be the final blow, when I would reveal everything at the most devastating moment possible. For the first phase, I decided to become the perfect wife, more perfect than I had ever been. That very morning, I went to the market and bought ingredients to make Harold's favorite dish, pork ribs with mashed potatoes and gravy. I spent the entire afternoon cooking while the children played in the backyard. I also fixed up our bedroom with special care, even putting fresh flowers on the nightstand on his side. When Harold arrived, 2 hours later than he should have, instead of questioning him or showing irritation, I greeted him with a warm smile. "I was waiting for you, dear." "Dinner is ready." The surprise on his face was priceless. He expected to find an irritated wife, maybe even tearful, questioning where he'd been. Instead, he found a smiling woman, wearing a pretty dress I hadn't worn in months, with the house spotless and his favorite dish on the table. "What are we celebrating?" he asked suspiciously. "Nothing special. I just thought you deserved a treat after working so hard." He visibly relaxed, and for the first time in weeks, he seemed truly present during dinner. He talked about the mill, about colleagues, and even casually mentioned the manager's new secretary, Miss Vera. "She seems very efficient," I commented naturally. "The manager must be pleased." "Yes, very. She came from the city, studied typing and everything." It was difficult to maintain the smile while he talked about her with that gleam in his eyes, but I managed. And that night, when we went to bed, I was especially affectionate, as I hadn't been in months. Harold fell asleep with a satisfied smile on his face, completely unaware of the storm I was preparing. In the following days, I maintained this posture of a dedicated and carefree wife, always smiling, always available, never questioning his schedules or commitments. When he said he needed to work late on Wednesdays, precisely the day mentioned in the note I found, I would just nod and say I'd save dinner for when he got home. This first phase lasted almost 2 months. 2 months in which I observed, learned, and prepared the ground. Harold became completely comfortable, convinced that I suspected nothing. He began to talk more openly about work, about meetings he would have, about important projects, and without realizing it, he was providing me with all the information I would need for the second phase of my plan. In July 1966, while Harold slept soundly after a Sunday of fishing with friends, I began to search his pockets and wallet. I found a receipt from a hotel downtown, the Riverside Inn, dated the previous Wednesday. I also found the manager's business card with a phone number written on the back, Vera, home. And finally, I discovered that Harold kept a small notebook where he noted the times of his meetings with her, disguised as extraordinary work meetings. With this information, I moved to the second phase of my plan, silent sabotage. I started with small things. When Harold had an important meeting in the morning, I would accidentally set the alarm clock half an hour late. When he mentioned a report he needed to take to the manager, I would carefully alter some numbers while typing it for him at night. Small errors, nothing too obvious, just enough to create doubts about his competence. "I don't understand," he'd say, frustrated after a difficult day. The manager said the numbers in the report didn't add up. "How strange, dear. Maybe it's too much pressure at work. You've been so tired." I also began to interfere in his affair with Vera. One afternoon, when he was at work, I called the number I had found. "Hello, may I speak with Miss Vera?" "Yes, who's calling?" Her voice was young, melodious. I imagined her beautiful, confident, everything I was no longer after years of marriage and 3 children. "This is Harold Anderson's wife." I made a calculated pause. "I just wanted to let you know that he won't be able to make it to your appointment today. He had to travel urgently to see his mother who's ill." I heard her breathing falter on the other end of the line. I don't know what you're talking about. Harold and I only work together." "Of course, dear. That's exactly what he tells me too. Have a good day." I hung up, feeling a strange satisfaction. It wasn't just the petty pleasure of scaring my husband's mistress. It was something deeper, the feeling of power that came from taking control of the situation. That night, when Harold came home, I immediately noticed his restlessness. He kept checking his watch, seemed nervous. Obviously, Vera hadn't shown up for their meeting, and he didn't understand why. "Any problems at work, dear? You seem worried." "No, nothing. Just tired." In the following days, I intensified my interventions. When Harold wasn't home, I would call Vera and hang up when she answered, or leave strange messages with her landlady. I'd discovered she lived in a boarding house for young women. Once I sent an anonymous letter insinuating that Harold had another mistress besides her. At the same time, I began building my independence. One afternoon, I visited Mrs. Henderson, a lady who had a small sewing workshop in the neighborhood. I'd always admired her work, and as a child, I dreamed of learning to sew like her. "Mrs. Henderson, would you accept teaching me to sew professionally? I can pay with work, helping you with whatever you need." She looked at me curiously. "Why this interest now, Dorothy? I thought you were busy with the children and the house." "The children are growing, and I think it's time to think about the future. You never know what life can bring us, right?" Mrs. Henderson agreed to teach me. I started going to her workshop 3 times a week while the children were at school. I learned quickly, perhaps because I had a motivation that went beyond simple interest. At home, I continued being the perfect wife. I took care of everything, always smiled, never questioned. But in the moments when I was alone, I worked on my plan. I started saving small amounts of money that I economized from the household budget. I hid the coins and bills inside an empty cookie tin at the back of the kitchen cabinet. I also began befriending the wives of Harold's superiors at the mill. Whenever there was a social event, a barbecue, a birthday, a company party, I approached them naturally. We'd talk about children, recipes, fashion, and inevitably about our husband's work. "Harold has been so worried about those reports," I commented once with the manager's wife, Mrs. Collins. "It seems there have been some errors in the numbers." "My husband mentioned that," she responded. "He said he's starting to worry about Harold's attention to detail." "Oh, it must be fatigue. He works so hard, you know, especially at those extraordinary Wednesday meetings." I saw a shadow pass across Mrs. Collins's face. "Wednesday meetings? Funny, my husband usually plays cards with friends that day." I shrugged, as if the information had no importance. "Must be some special project. Harold doesn't go into details, and I don't ask. I trust my husband completely." Mrs. Collins smiled, but I noticed I had planted a seed of doubt in her mind, and I knew that sooner or later she would mention this to her husband. The sabotage continued for almost a year. Small interventions, nothing drastic, just enough to create tension in Harold's professional life and in his relationship with Vera. During that time, my sewing skills improved significantly. Mrs. Henderson started entrusting me with more complex work, and soon I was making dresses, shirts, even suits. "You have talent, Dorothy," she told me one day. "Have you thought about working on your own?" The idea wasn't new to me. It was part of my larger plan. but it was good to hear it from someone with Mrs. Henderson's experience. I've been thinking about it, but I'd need my own sewing machine and clients. The machine can be bought in installments. As for clients, I can refer some I can't attend to due to lack of time. With Mrs. Henderson's blessing, I began accepting small orders. I worked while the children were at school or after everyone was asleep. The money I earned went directly into my cookie tin, which was getting heavier and heavier. In March 1967, 1 year after discovering Harold's betrayal, I took another important step. I opened a savings account in my name. Back then, it wasn't common for women to have their own bank accounts, but the bank manager, Mr. Peters, was a customer of my sewing work and facilitated the process. "Are you thinking of expanding your business?" he asked as we signed the papers. "I'm thinking about the future, Mr. Peters. My future." While my financial independence grew silently, Harold's situation at work deteriorated. The small errors I introduced in his reports, combined with the doubts I subtly planted in the minds of his superiors through their wives, began to affect his reputation. He wasn't promoted when an opportunity arose, and that left him deeply frustrated. "I don't understand," he vented one night. "I work harder than anyone there. I do overtime, take work home, and still they chose Richardson for supervisor." "Maybe they're not valuing your effort as they should," I responded with feigned indignation. "You deserve so much more, dear." Feeding his resentment against the company was part of my plan. A frustrated and bitter Harold would be more prone to errors in judgment. As for his relationship with Vera, my subtle interventions were also having an effect. The mysterious calls, the conflicting messages, the insinuations about other women. All of this created an atmosphere of distrust between them. One afternoon in September 1967, when Harold was at work, I received an unexpected visit. It was Vera. I recognized her immediately, although we had never been formally introduced. Young, beautiful, wearing one of those modern dresses that were in fashion and the famous red lipstick. "Mrs. Anderson," she said, visibly nervous. "May I speak with you for a moment?" I invited her in, maintaining a neutral expression. Inside, my heart was racing. I didn't expect this direct confrontation, but I was prepared for it. "I'm here because—" She hesitated, looking at her own hands. "I think you know about me and Harold." "I know about your work together at the mill, of course," I replied with a calm smile. "Harold always speaks very highly of your efficiency as a secretary." She stared at me, confused by my apparent naivety. "Mrs. Anderson, I think there's someone trying to cause problems." I've been receiving strange calls, confusing messages. What a terrible world, isn't it? I said. People who have nothing better to do create intrigues. I served her a glass of water. But don't worry about that, dear. I'm sure it's just some envious colleague at the mill. Vera looked increasingly uncomfortable. She clearly didn't expect to find such a calm wife, apparently oblivious to the situation. Well, I just wanted to clarify that anything you may have heard, I haven't heard anything, dear. And even if I had, I wouldn't give it importance. I trust my husband completely. When Vera left, she seemed even more confused than when she arrived. And that was exactly what I wanted. Doubt is a powerful tool. She would now doubt her own suspicions about me, perhaps even question Harold's loyalty. That visit showed me I was on the right path. The second phase of my plan was working better than I expected. It was time to start preparing the third and final phase, the final blow. But for that, I would need concrete proof of Harold's betrayal. Proof that could be shown to other people. Proof he couldn't deny. And that's how I met Mr. Thompson, the retired photographer, who would become an unexpected ally in my silent revenge. I met Mr. Thompson by chance, or perhaps it was fate giving me a hand. It was October 1967, and I was at the market buying fabrics for a dress a client had ordered. While choosing between navy blue satin and emerald green, I noticed an elderly man with white hair trying to sew a button on his jacket, sitting on a bench near the entrance. His hands trembled slightly, and he seemed frustrated with the needle that kept escaping his fingers. I approached and offered, "May I help you, sir? I'm a seamstress." He raised his eyes, a blue faded behind thick-rimmed glasses, and smiled gratefully. "That would be very kind, ma'am. This button has been giving me trouble since yesterday." While I sewed the button, we talked. His name was Robert Thompson. He was 67 years old, and he'd been a photographer for the local newspaper for more than 3 decades before retiring. He still maintained a small studio at home, where he developed photos and occasionally photographed weddings and baptisms to supplement his retirement. "It's hard for the hands now," he said, showing his fingers slightly curved by arthritis. "But the eyes are still good for framing a photo, and I have my laboratory at home where I develop everything. These quick services nowadays don't have the same care." While I finished the button, an idea began to form in my mind. Proof. I needed proof of Harold's betrayal. And what would be more irrefutable than photographs? "Mr. Thompson, do you still do discreet work?" He looked at me intrigued. "What kind of work, ma'am?" "Dorothy. Dorothy Anderson. And I need someone who can take some photographs without drawing attention." I explained, without going into too many details, that I suspected my husband was involved in something that could harm our family. I didn't mention betrayal directly, but insinuated I needed proof to protect myself and my children. Mr. Thompson studied me for a moment, his wise eyes evaluating my sincerity. "You don't seem like the type of person who would create problems without reason," he said finally. "If you're asking for my help, you must have good reasons." We agreed to meet the next day at his studio, actually, the converted living room of his small house in the Oak Street neighborhood. There I explained in more detail what I needed: photographs of Harold and Vera together in situations that would leave no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "They meet every Wednesday," I explained. "First at Joe's Diner around 5 in the afternoon. Then they go to the Riverside Inn." Mr. Thompson nodded, no judgment in his gaze, just a professional considering the practical aspects of a job. "The diner has large windows facing the street," he pondered. "I can position myself at the bus stop across with my Rolleiflex. Nobody finds it strange for an old man to be waiting for transportation. As for the hotel, that's more complicated." "You don't need to risk yourself with the hotel," I assured him. "Just capture unmistakable moments at the diner. A kiss, holding hands, anything that can't be explained as a merely professional relationship." We settled the practical details. Mr. Thompson refused to accept advance payment, saying only that if he got the photos, we'd talk about compensation afterward. "I don't like betraying anyone's trust," he said, "but I also don't like seeing families destroyed by lies." The following Wednesday, I dressed with special care in the morning. When Harold was having coffee, I commented casually, "Today I'm going to visit my Aunt Margaret in Riverside. She's not feeling well. I'll probably be back late, so don't worry about dinner." Harold barely looked up from the newspaper. "Sure, sure. Give her my regards." Aunt Margaret existed, but lived in another city and was perfectly healthy. What mattered was that Harold now was certain I would be away all day, especially during the time he'd meet Vera. Instead of taking the bus to Riverside, I went to Mr. Thompson's house. He was already ready, with his Rolleiflex camera hanging around his neck and a wide-brimmed hat to shade his face. "Are you sure about this?" he asked one last time. More than ever. I didn't accompany him to the diner, of course. That would be too risky. Instead, I spent the afternoon at Mrs. Henderson's house, sewing and trying to contain my anxiety. At 7 p.m., as agreed, I returned to Mr. Thompson's house. He received me with a grave expression. "I got some images," he said simply, leading me to the small room he used as a photographic laboratory. Under the characteristic red light, he showed me the photographs still wet, hanging on an improvised clothesline. My heart stopped when I saw the first photo. There were Harold and Vera sitting at a table at the back of Joe's diner. There was no mistaking it. It was my husband, leaning toward her, their hands intertwined on the table. In the second photo, they were leaving the diner with his arm around her waist. The third showed something that made me swallow hard, a quick but unmistakable kiss exchanged on the sidewalk in front of the diner. "There's more," said Mr. Thompson hesitantly. "I followed them for a few blocks until—" The fourth photograph showed Harold and Vera entering the Riverside Inn. It wasn't as clear an image as the others, taken from farther away with some people passing in front. But it was still Harold, without a shadow of doubt, guiding Vera through the side entrance of the hotel, the one guests used when they didn't want to be seen passing through reception. I held the photographs with trembling hands. There was the proof I'd been seeking, irrefutable, concrete, impossible to deny or explain. "Are you all right?" asked Mr. Thompson, concerned about my silence. "I am," I replied, surprising myself with the firmness of my voice. "Actually, I've never been better." It was true. Instead of the searing pain I expected to feel upon seeing those images, what I felt was a strange peace, as if the final confirmation of the betrayal had freed something inside me. There were no more doubts, no more vain hopes that it was all a misunderstanding. Now I could move forward with my plan without remorse or hesitation. "How much do I owe you for this work?" I asked, opening my purse. Mr. Thompson shook his head. "Nothing, Mrs. Anderson, but I have a request, if I may." "Of course. Use these photos wisely. I've seen many tragedies in my life, and I know how revelations like this can lead people to thoughtless acts." I promised him I wouldn't do anything hasty. The photographs wouldn't be used for a public scandal or an emotional confrontation. They would be kept for the right moment, the moment I was carefully preparing for over a year. In the following months, I intensified all fronts of my plan. At the mill, Harold's reputation continued to decline thanks to my subtle interventions in his reports and the doubts I planted in the minds of his superiors through their wives. In February 1968, something happened that accelerated my plans. During a dinner at the manager's house, where we were present as guests, Harold made a serious mistake. Emboldened by wine and the accumulated frustration of recent months, he began to openly criticize the mill board's decisions. "They don't know what they're doing," he said too loudly. "That contract with the British company was a disaster. I warned them, but nobody listened to me." I saw the manager's face harden, while his wife, Mrs. Collins, with whom I'd cultivated a strategic friendship, looked at me with pity. "Your husband has been very tense lately," she whispered. "Work," I replied with a sigh. "And perhaps other concerns." I let the insinuation hang in the air, knowing Mrs. Collins was perceptive enough to understand the subtext. From her expression, I realized she'd already heard rumors about Harold and Vera. That night marked the beginning of the end of Harold's career at the mill. The imprudent criticism, combined with his growing reputation for inattention and the rumors about his improper behavior with the manager's secretary, put him definitively on the list of undesirable employees. At home, I maintained my facade as the perfect wife while secretly consolidating my financial independence. My small sewing business prospered. I already had loyal clients, including several influential ladies from town who appreciated my meticulous work and discretion. In March 1968, using the savings accumulated in my savings account, I bought my own sewing machine, a brand new imported Singer. I initially hid it at Mrs. Henderson's house, explaining to Harold that I'd be spending more time there as her assistant, since the lady was having vision problems. "Won't this interfere with your duties at home?" he asked, without real interest. "Not at all. The children are at school during the day, and I can get all the housework done in the morning." He shrugged, satisfied with the explanation. He was so absorbed in his own problems, the growing pressure at work, the increasingly tense relationship with Vera thanks to my interventions, the debts that were beginning to accumulate due to some unsuccessful investments, that he barely noticed the changes in me. He didn't notice how I was more confident, how my posture had changed, how I no longer lowered my eyes when talking to other people. He didn't notice the new basic accounting books I studied after everyone was asleep, nor the notebook where I carefully noted plans for a future without him. In June 1968, another significant event occurred. Vera, Harold's mistress, resigned from the mill. I learned this through Mrs. Collins, who called to tell me the news. The girl simply showed up early this morning, handed in a resignation letter, and said she was going back to the city, she explained, clearly delighted with the drama. They say she had a terrible argument with someone the day before, perhaps with your husband? Harold didn't mention anything, I replied with feigned surprise, but he's been so quiet lately. The truth Mrs. Collins didn't know was that I had meticulously orchestrated that departure. Weeks earlier, using handwriting different from mine, I sent an anonymous letter to Vera with copies of the photographs Mr. Thompson had taken. Along with it, just a note. The manager has already seen these images. Your reputation in town is ruined. Go back to the city while you can. It was a lie, of course. The manager hadn't seen anything, and I hadn't distributed the photos to anyone. But Vera, already weakened by the doubts and tensions I'd been creating in her relationship with Harold, believed it and did exactly what I expected. She fled. That night, when Harold came home, I immediately noticed something was wrong. His face was pale, eyes red, hands trembling slightly as he tried to light a cigarette. "Dinner will be ready in 5 minutes," I announced cheerfully from the kitchen. "I made those ribs you like." He didn't respond. He sat heavily in the living room armchair and stared at nothing. Later, during dinner, he ate in silence while the children chattered about their day at school. "Any problems at the mill, dear?" I asked innocently. He looked at me as if he'd forgotten I was there. "The manager's secretary resigned today, without notice." "What a shame," I commented, serving more mashed potatoes to our youngest son. "She seemed so efficient from what you told me." Harold spent the rest of the night drinking. It was the first time I'd seen him like this, completely defeated. Part of me, a small, distant part that still held some affection for the man he had been, felt sorry, but the greater part was satisfied. Everything was going according to plan. In the following weeks, Harold's situation at the mill deteriorated rapidly. Without Vera to cover his mistakes or alert him to problems, and with the management's confidence completely shaken, he sank deeper and deeper. He started drinking more, arriving late, neglecting responsibilities. In August 1968, he was called to the manager's office and informed that his services were no longer needed. After 10 years at the mill, Harold was unemployed. When he came home that afternoon, much earlier than usual, I saw in his eyes that something definitive had happened. "I was fired," he said simply, collapsing into the kitchen chair. I played the role of the shocked and indignant wife. How could they, after all these years of dedication? They said my work was no longer meeting expectations, that there were too many errors, too many failures. He buried his face in his hands. "I don't know what we're going to do now, Dorothy." "I don't know how we're going to pay the bills, how we're going to feed the children." It was at that moment, seeing Harold completely vulnerable, that I realized it was time. The time for the final blow, for the outcome I'd been meticulously planning for almost 2 years. But first, there was one last preparation to make, one last piece to place on my board. "Don't worry about money now," I said, placing my hand on his shoulder. "I have some savings put away, and my work with Mrs. Henderson is going well. We'll get through this together." He raised his head, an expression of surprise on his haggard face. "Savings? What savings?" "I've always put aside a little from the grocery money for emergencies like this." I didn't mention the real value of my savings, nor my plans for them. I let him believe it was just a few bills saved in a cookie tin, enough for a few weeks at most. That night, while Harold slept a restless sleep, I began preparing the stage for the final confrontation. I separated Mr. Thompson's photographs, the records of all the small sabotages I'd carried out, the statements from my savings account, and I began writing a document, not a love letter or hate letter, but a contract. A contract that would forever change the balance of power between me and Harold. A contract that would be my true declaration of independence. And as I wrote by the dim light of the bedside lamp, I thought of the naive young woman I'd been 2 years before, that Dorothy who cried hidden in the bathroom upon discovering her husband's betrayal. She now seemed like a distant stranger, almost unrecognizable. In her place was a woman who had learned to use patience as a weapon, silence as strategy, and intelligence as a shield. A woman who would never again be anyone's victim. The next day, with everything prepared, I invited some people for lunch at our house on Sunday. "To cheer up your father," I explained to the children. "He's been so sad about this mill business." Among the guests, strategically chosen, were the mill manager and his wife, 2 respected neighbors, and Mr. Thompson, the photographer. Witnesses for what was about to happen. The stage was set. The moment of truth would finally arrive. I woke up that Sunday with a strange calm. It was September 15th, 1968, a date that would be forever engraved in my memory. The day I would finally reveal everything I had built and destroyed over the past 2 years. I got up earlier than usual and began preparations for lunch. I had planned every detail meticulously. The menu, pork ribs with mashed potatoes and gravy, Harold's favorite dish. The table decoration with the lace tablecloth we only used on special occasions. The placement of guests strategically arranged. While I seasoned the meat, I heard Harold get up. In recent days, since the dismissal, he wandered around the house like a shadow, avoiding looking into my eyes, avoiding the children. Shame weighed on his shoulders like an invisible cloak. "Good morning," he muttered, entering the kitchen. "Why are you preparing so much food?" "I invited some people for lunch," I replied calmly, without interrupting my work. "I thought it would be good for you to have company, to talk a little." "People? What people?" There was a note of panic in his voice. "Just some friends, Mr. and Mrs. Collins, the Martins from the corner house, Mr. Thompson." "The mill manager?" Harold paled. "You invited my former boss to our house after what happened?" I turned to him, drying my hands on the apron. "Precisely because of that, Harold. I'm sure there's a misunderstanding that can be resolved. Mr. Collins always admired you, and you worked there for so long." He ran his hand through his hair, visibly agitated. "I don't want to see that man. I don't want to see anyone. Call them and cancel." "Too late," I responded firmly. "They've already confirmed. It would be a terrible insult to cancel now." Harold seemed to want to argue more, but something in my expression, perhaps a determination he'd never seen before, made him back down. "Do as you wish, then," he said finally, leaving the kitchen. The children woke up soon after, excited about the idea of the special lunch. Thomas, at 8 years old, Mary, almost 7, and John, at 4, were active and noisy children. Their laughter filled the house with a joy that contrasted sharply with the tense atmosphere between me and Harold. "Can you help me set the table?" I asked them. "And then I want you to wear your Sunday clothes. We'll have important visitors." While the children ran to complete the tasks, I turned my attention to the final preparations. Besides the food and the table, there was another crucial element for that day. The brown envelope I had prepared the night before, now hidden in the drawer of my sewing machine. The guests began arriving punctually at noon. First, the Martins, our longtime neighbors, respectable people in the community. He was a teacher at the local school, she a nurse at the small-town hospital. People whose opinion had weight, whose presence conferred legitimacy to any event. Next came Mr. Thompson, the photographer, bringing a bottle of wine. He greeted me with a look that mixed curiosity and concern. He knew something important would happen, although he didn't know exactly what. Finally, Mr. Collins, the mill manager, and his wife, Mrs. Collins, arrived. I felt Harold stiffen beside me when we received them at the door. The handshake between the two men was brief and uncomfortable. "I'm glad you accepted our invitation, Mr. Collins," I said, leading them to the living room. "It's important to maintain ties, even in difficult times." Lunch began in a tense atmosphere. The conversation flowed artificially, with everyone avoiding mentioning Harold's dismissal or the situation at the mill. We talked about the weather, about the children, about the latest town news. I served the food, filled glasses, smiled at the appropriate moments. Harold ate little, drinking more wine than usual. His restless eyes went from one guest to another, as if trying to guess the real reason for that meeting. Finally, when everyone finished dessert, a custard pie that was my specialty, I cleared my throat lightly and stood up. "I thank you all for being here today," I began. "As you know, we're going through a difficult time with Harold's departure from the mill, but I believe every crisis is also an opportunity." Harold looked at me alarmed. It wasn't common for me to speak like this in public, to assume control of a situation in that manner. "For that reason," I continued, "I'd like to share some news with you. For some time now, I've been working on a personal project, something that started small but is now ready to grow." I excused myself and went to our bedroom, where I had left the brown envelope. Upon returning, I placed it on the table in front of everyone. For the past 2 years, I've been working as a seamstress, first helping Mrs. Henderson, then on my own. I've managed to save a considerable amount, and I'm ready to open my own shop. The surprise on Harold's face was evident. He had no idea of the real value of my work, nor how much I'd saved. "In fact," I continued, "I've already rented a space on Main Street and bought new equipment. Dorothy's dressmaking will open its doors next week. Mrs. Collins was the first to react, clapping enthusiastically. "What wonderful news, Dorothy! I've always admired your talent with sewing." The other guests also expressed support, except Harold, who continued staring at me with a mixture of confusion and distrust. "But that's not all," I said, now looking directly at my husband. "I have other news to share, a decision I made after much reflection." I opened the envelope and took out several documents. First, I showed the lease contract for the commercial space, already signed and registered. Then, the savings account book with a balance that made Harold's eyes widen. "How did you... when?" he stammered. "A penny at a time, Harold, a day at a time for almost 2 years." Then I placed the last document on the table, a contract I had drafted, establishing our formal separation and division of property. "I'm leaving you, Harold," I announced with a calm that surprised even me. "The children will come with me. I've already rented an apartment above the shop with enough space for the 4 of us." A heavy silence fell over the room. The guests seemed petrified, divided between the embarrassment of witnessing such an intimate scene and curiosity about the unfolding of that drama. "You can't do this," Harold finally responded, his voice trembling with anger and shock. "You can't just decide to leave and take my children." "Not without a reason," I replied. "Oh, but I have a reason," I countered, removing the last item from the envelope, the photographs taken by Mr. Thompson showing Harold and Vera in unmistakable situations. I placed the photos on the table, face up, where everyone could see them. I heard Mrs. Collins catch her breath. Mr. Collins frowned, visibly uncomfortable. "This is just the tip of the iceberg," I continued, keeping my voice firm despite the emotion that threatened to overflow. For almost 2 years, I lived alongside a man who lied to me, who betrayed not just our marriage, but also the trust I placed in him. Harold looked at the photographs as if they were venomous snakes. His face alternated between paper white and red with shame. "You spied on me," he managed to say finally. "Let's say I sought the truth and found it, just as I found my own strength in the process." I turned to the guests who were following everything in silence. "I apologize for involving you in this personal matter, but I needed witnesses, not to humiliate Harold, although he deserves it, but to protect myself and the children. To make it clear that this decision wasn't made in the heat of the moment, but after long reflection and with concrete proof." Mr. Collins cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable, but also with an expression suggesting many things now made sense to him. "Mrs. Anderson," he said finally, "I understand now why you insisted on our presence today. And I must say, I deeply regret not having noticed sooner what was happening. Mr. Anderson's conduct at the mill wasn't just unprofessional, but also personal," I completed. "I know Vera worked directly with you, and I know she left town abruptly a few weeks ago." Mrs. Collins intervened, addressing Harold with undisguised contempt. "So the rumors were true." You and that young woman, right under all our noses. Shame on you, Mr. Anderson, absolute shame. Harold seemed to physically diminish with each word. The arrogant and confident man I'd known was reduced to a shadow, cornered by his own actions. Dorothy, he tried, his voice now almost pleading. Can we talk about this in private? We don't need to involve other people in our problems. Too late, I replied, recalling the same words I'd used that morning. You already involved other people when you decided to betray our family. Now, I'm just putting everything out in the open. I turned again to the guests. I didn't invite you just to witness this revelation, but also to announce my new beginning. Next week, when I open my shop, I'd very much like to count on all of your presence. The atmosphere began to change subtly. The initial shock gave way to a different feeling. Perhaps admiration for my composure, perhaps respect for my determination. Mrs. Collins was the first to speak up. I'll definitely be there, and I'll order a new dress. Mr. Martin, our neighbor who had observed everything in silence until then, also spoke. Dorothy, know that you can count on us for whatever you need. You and the children are part of this community. I felt a wave of gratitude for those people. I had calculated correctly. By exposing the situation in that way, I was ensuring not just witnesses for my version of the facts, but also a support network for my future. Harold seemed to finally understand the extent of what was happening. It wasn't just the end of his marriage, but the complete collapse of his social position, his reputation in town. You planned all of this? He said in a low voice, almost to himself. Since when have you been setting this trap? I looked directly into his eyes, something I realized I hadn't done with real confidence in many years. Since that shirt with lipstick on the collar, Harold. Since the note signed by V that I found in your pocket. Since I discovered that the man who swore to love and respect me was building a parallel life with another woman. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then, surprisingly, it was Mr. Thompson who spoke. Mr. Anderson, I took those photographs. I'm not proud of it, but your wife needed proof. And after seeing how you acted, I can't condemn her for seeking justice in her own way. Harold stared at the elderly photographer with anger, but soon gave up, as if he had no more energy to fight. What do you want from me, Dorothy? He asked finally. Do you want me to leave the house? Do you want me to disappear? I want you to sign these papers, I replied, pushing toward him the contract I had prepared, establishing our formal separation, division of property, and custody of the children. You can keep the house. It's almost paid off anyway, and I'll need a complete fresh start. In exchange, I take responsibility for the children without demanding alimony. It was a generous proposal considering the circumstances. Harold read the document quickly, his expression changing from distrust to surprise. You thought of everything, he murmured. Every detail, I confirmed. There's a pen next to the contract. The guests watched in silence as Harold, after a moment of hesitation, picked up the pen and signed the document, first one copy, then the other. When he finished, he pushed the papers back to me with a defeated gesture. "It's done then," I declared, collecting the documents. Starting tomorrow, the children and I will move to the new apartment. We'll take only our personal belongings and some furniture from their rooms. The rest stays with you. The guests began to stand, realizing it was time to leave. Despite the discomfort of the situation, there was also a feeling that they had witnessed something important: the rebirth of a woman, the reconfiguration of a family. Mrs. Collins approached and hugged me. "You're stronger than I ever imagined, Dorothy," she whispered. "Count on me for whatever you need." One by one, the guests said goodbye. Mr. Thompson was the last to leave, squeezing my hand with a look that said more than words. He had been a crucial part of that process, and we both knew it. When everyone left, I was alone in the room with Harold. The children had been sent to play in the backyard even before the confrontation began. "Why like this, Dorothy?" he asked finally. "Why didn't you just confront me when you found out? Why all this theater?" I sat down again at the table, facing the man I once loved with all my heart. "Because I wanted more than just to separate from you, Harold. I wanted to build my independence brick by brick. I wanted to prove, mainly to myself, that I could start over from scratch, that I could be more than just the betrayed wife, the abandoned woman." He shook his head slowly. "You destroyed me." "No, Harold. You destroyed yourself." "I just let you reap what you sowed." That night, while packing our bags for our departure the next morning, I felt a deep peace. The plan I had conceived almost 2 years earlier was complete. The revenge I had architected had been executed perfectly. But surprisingly, what I felt wasn't exactly triumph or malicious joy. It was liberation, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders, as if, for the first time in many years, I could breathe completely. I looked at the children, sleeping peacefully in their rooms, oblivious to the great change that would happen in their lives. Tomorrow we would begin a new chapter, without lies, without betrayals, without pretenses. Just me, my children, and a future that, for the first time, seemed truly mine. The next morning, September 16th, 1968, I woke up before dawn. I stayed a few moments observing the bedroom where I had slept for 10 years, the floral wallpaper I had hung myself, the dark wood dresser where I kept my few jewels, the oval mirror on the wall where I had looked at myself so many times, questioning who I really was. This would be the last time I would wake up in that space. The last time I would be Dorothy Anderson, the submissive wife of the textile mill supervisor. From that day on, I would just be Dorothy, seamstress, businesswoman, and independent woman. I got up silently so as not to wake Harold, who had slept on the living room sofa. Our last belongings were already boxed, the suitcases ready by the door. I had hired Mrs. Sullivan's oldest son to help us with the move. He would come with his pickup truck at 8 o'clock. First, I woke the children. Thomas, my eldest, already partially understood what was happening. At 8 years old, he was observant and sensitive, characteristics he inherited from me. "Are we really going to live somewhere else, Mom?" he asked, while helping John, the youngest, get dressed. "Yes, dear. Remember the space I showed you last week? The big apartment above the store will be our new home." "And Dad? Isn't he coming with us?" I had rehearsed that conversation mentally dozens of times, searching for the right words to explain such a complex situation to such young children. "Your father will continue living in this house. We'll visit him, and he'll visit you, but we won't all live together anymore." Mary, with her almost 7 years, frowned in confusion. Why? Because sometimes, even when people care about each other, they need different spaces to be happy, like when you and Thomas fight and need to stay in separate rooms for a while. It wasn't the perfect explanation, but it was the best I could offer at that moment. Later, when they were older, I would tell them more details, or perhaps not. Some truths are too heavy to be shared, even with those we love. At 8 o'clock sharp, the pickup truck arrived. Harold had already left. He left a note saying he would spend the day at his brother's house and would return at night when we had already departed. It was typical of him to avoid direct confrontations, emotionally difficult situations. Part of me felt relief. Another part, a pang of disappointment. After everything, he wouldn't even say goodbye to the children. The move was quick. We weren't taking much: clothes, toys, some books, family photographs, and the few pieces of furniture that fit in the new space. My Singer sewing machine, of course, was transported with special care. It was the symbol and instrument of my new life. By noon, we were already settled in the apartment above the shop on Main Street. It was a simple but airy and bright space. Three small bedrooms, a living room that connected with the kitchen, a bathroom. It didn't have the backyard of the old house, but there was a small balcony where I placed pots of geraniums and ferns. Downstairs was the shop itself, a large room with large windows facing the street where I installed my sewing machine, a cutting table, and shelves for fabrics and notions. At the entrance, a small reception area with comfortable chairs for clients. That first week was one of adaptation and organization. The children initially found the new environment strange, especially John, who woke up during the night asking for his father. Mary showed herself more resilient, delighted with her new room painted light pink. Thomas, always serious and responsible beyond his years, tried to help me with everything, as if he felt we were now an even closer team. The official opening of Dorothy's dressmaking took place the following Sunday, exactly 1 week after the lunch that had definitively changed our lives. It was a simple but significant event. Mrs. Collins showed up with her friends from the local society, ensuring that my small business would be known among the town's influential women. Mrs. Henderson brought a plant as a good luck gift. Mr. A. Thompson took photographs for the local newspaper, a small note about the town's newest enterprise, managed by a talented seamstress. The first months were of intense work. I woke up at 5 a.m., prepared the children's breakfast, organized their clothes for school. At 7, I took them to the school gate, which was only 3 blocks from our new home. At 8, I opened the shop and worked nonstop until noon, when I closed for an hour to pick up the children, prepare their lunch, and leave them at school again for the afternoon period. From 2 to 6, I returned to work, receiving clients, cutting fabrics, sewing, fitting. It was exhausting, but exactly the kind of tiredness that brings satisfaction. Each finished dress, each satisfied client, each compliment received was another brick in the construction of my new identity. I was no longer poor Dorothy, whose husband cheated on her. I was Mrs. Dorothy, the talented seamstress on Main Street. Harold, as agreed, visited the children on Sundays. He'd take them for walks, for ice cream, fishing at the river. At first, I took advantage of those hours to get ahead on work at the shop. Later, as things stabilized, I started using that time for myself. I read books, visited friends, or simply rested. It was during one of those Sundays, about 6 months after our separation, that Harold asked to talk to me alone. The children had already gone upstairs to the apartment, and we were on the sidewalk in front of the shop. "You seem well," he commented, observing me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Different." "I'm well," I replied simply. And it was true. At 28 years old, I felt more alive, more secure, more myself than I had ever been. "I got a job in another city," he continued. "A furniture factory in Riverside. I'll start next month." I nodded, understanding what that meant. "The children will miss you. I'll come back once a month to see them, and during school vacations, if you allow it, I'd like them to spend a few days with me there." "If they want to, I don't see a problem." There was a moment of uncomfortable silence. Then, to my surprise, Harold said something I never expected to hear. "You were right, Dorothy, about everything." Not just about Vera, but about me, about the kind of man I was. Selfish, arrogant, incapable of valuing what I had. I was momentarily speechless. I didn't expect an admission of guilt, much less something resembling an apology. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally asked. "Because I'm leaving, and because it's true, and because I wanted you to know that I learned something from all this, that perhaps I've become a slightly better person thanks to you." I didn't respond immediately. Part of me, that young 26-year-old Dorothy who cried hidden in the bathroom upon discovering the betrayal, wanted to thank him for those words. Another part, the 28-year-old woman who had rebuilt her life from scratch, knew they came too late to make a real difference. "I wish you good luck in Riverside, Harold," I said finally. "Truly." He nodded, understanding that was all he would receive from me. Not explicit forgiveness, not reconciliation, just a sincere wish that he move on, just as I had done. The following years were of constant growth. Dorothy's dressmaking prospered, gaining a reputation beyond the town's limits. I started making wedding dresses, a lucrative specialty that brought me clients from neighboring towns. I hired 2 assistants, talented young women I trained personally. In 1972, 4 years after opening the shop, I took an even bolder step. I launched my own ready-to-wear clothing line in standardized sizes. It was a relatively new concept for a small interior town, but it worked. Dorothy's Creations became a regionally recognized brand, with a small store attached to the shop where I sold dresses, skirts, blouses, and sets designed and produced by me. The children grew healthy and happy. Thomas proved brilliant in his studies, especially in mathematics. Mary inherited my talent for sewing and design, spending hours by my side at the shop, learning the secrets of the craft. John, the youngest, was outgoing and charismatic, loved by everyone in the neighborhood. Harold kept his promise, visiting them monthly in the first years. Over time, the visits became more spaced out, every 2 months, then every 6. The children, initially anxious for these encounters, gradually built their lives without their father's constant presence. Not from my influence, I never spoke badly of Harold to them, but from natural adaptation to a new reality. In 1975, I received news that Harold had remarried, a woman from Riverside, a widow with a young daughter. I told the children, prepared for questions, for possible emotional reactions, but surprisingly they received the news with tranquility. "Does that mean we'll have a sister?" asked John, then 11 years old. "A half-sister," I corrected gently. "And perhaps, if your father and his new wife have more children, you'll have more siblings." "Cool." That was all he said, returning to play with his toy cars. I realized at that moment that time had done its healing work. The wounds of separation, both mine and the children's, had healed. We were moving forward, each in our own way. In 1978, 10 years after starting my journey as an independent businesswoman, I expanded my business again. I opened a second store in a larger city, 30 miles away. I hired more employees, including a manager to supervise operations while I concentrated on design and production. It was during this period that I met Albert, a widowed merchant, a fabric supplier for my shop. We started as business partners, then friends, and eventually something more. It was a mature relationship based on mutual respect and shared interests. At 38 years old, I discovered it was still possible to feel butterflies in my stomach from a new love, but now with the security of knowing exactly who I was and what I wanted. We married in 1980 in a simple ceremony with only family and close friends. Thomas, then 20, and an engineering student in the capital, was the best man. Mary, at 19, designed and sewed my dress, an elegant model in champagne silk, discreet but sophisticated. John, at 16, organized the small party after the ceremony, showing his talent for bringing people together and creating special moments. Albert brought a new dimension to my life, not just as a companion, but as a business partner. With his experience in commerce and my talent for creation, we expanded the Dorothy's Creations brand even further. By the end of the 1980s, we had 5 stores in different cities in the region. I never told Albert all the details of how I planned and executed my separation from Harold. He knew, of course, that I had been married before, that my ex-husband had betrayed me, that I built my business as a form of independence. But the minutiae of the silent revenge, the meticulous sabotage, the carefully prepared trap, those I kept to myself. Not out of shame or regret, but because they belonged to another Dorothy, a woman who needed to become hard to survive, who used the only weapon she had, her intelligence, to turn the game in her favor in a time when the cards were all stacked against women like her. The years passed. The children grew up, graduated, built their own lives. Thomas became an engineer, married, gave me 2 grandchildren. Mary followed in my footsteps in the fashion world, studying design in New York before returning to take over part of the family business. John, always the most restless, traveled the world before finally settling down as a teacher, his way of giving back to the world the love of knowledge he developed in our small home library. Albert and I lived 25 years together before his passing in 2005, victim of a sudden heart attack. It was a profound loss, but different from the pain I felt upon discovering Harold's betrayal. This was a clean, honest pain, the sadness of losing someone truly loved, not the humiliation of having been deceived. In 2010, at 70 years old, I decided to officially retire, passing complete control of Dorothy's Creations to Mary. The brand that had started as a small shop in an interior town had transformed into a respected regional chain, known for the quality and timeless elegance of its pieces. And now, at 84 years old, I look back and see the complete panorama of my life. I see the naive young woman I was, the determined woman I became, the successful businesswoman, the mother, the grandmother, the friend, the wife. All these Dorothys form who I am today. If you ask me if I regret what I did to Harold, the meticulously planned revenge, the silent destruction of his world, I will answer honestly, no, I don't regret it. In a time when women had few options, I created my own path. In a world that expected me to quietly accept humiliation, I found my own voice. I learned, through my children, that Harold passed away in 2015. His second marriage lasted until the end, and he had 2 more children with his new wife. He became a gentler man over time, according to Thomas, more present for his younger children than he had been for mine. Perhaps the lesson I gave him served some purpose after all. What I want you who are watching me now to understand is this. I'm not telling this story to encourage revenge or resentment. I'm telling it because it's a testament to how we can transform the worst betrayals into opportunities for growth, how we can use pain as fuel for a better life. If I'm here today, an 84-year-old lady surrounded by the love of children and grandchildren, respected in my community, financially independent, and at peace with myself, it's not because I allowed myself to be defined by the betrayal I suffered. It's because I chose to define myself through calculated actions and unwavering determination. The world has changed a lot since 1968. Women today have options I never dreamed of having. They can divorce without scandal, can open businesses without raising eyebrows, can be independent without needing elaborate strategies. But some lessons are timeless. Never allow others to define your worth. Never accept less than you deserve. And above all, remember that the best revenge isn't destroying the other. It's building yourself so magnificently that when they look at you, they feel ashamed of what they lost. This is my story. The story of how I pretended not to know my husband was cheating on me in order to destroy him little by little, and in the process, completely rebuild myself. Thank you for listening to me. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel. And don't forget to share in the comments where you're watching from, because when we share our experiences, we strengthen each other. A warm hug from this grandma who learned over time that our greatest strength is within ourselves, waiting only for the right moment to reveal itself. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Frank rotated the coffee cup between his fingers, searching for words. When you approach the moment of ending a career, of passing the torch, you end up reflecting on life, on the choices we made, he continued. I didn't always make the right choices, Celia. You know that better than anyone. I remained silent, allowing him to follow his own pace. There was no anger in me, just a tranquil curiosity about where that conversation would lead us. "I came to apologize," he said finally, raising his eyes to meet mine. "Not just for what happened with Amanda, but for all the years I didn't value what we had, when I didn't see your strength, your talent, your dedication." The words were sincere. I could feel it. There was no rehearsal in them, just the raw honesty of a man facing his mistakes. "Why now, Frank, after so many years?" He sighed, running his hand through his white hair. "Because now I understand better. Because I saw what you built after our separation. Because I listened to your radio program and realized the impact your words have on so many people's lives." I was surprised. "You listened to my program?" He nodded, a bit embarrassed. "Every Thursday." At first, I confess, it was out of curiosity. Then because I really appreciate what you say, the way you approach difficult topics with so much humanity. We were silent for a moment, absorbing the strangeness of that situation. The man who had broken my heart, listening to my weekly reflections on life, love, overcoming. "I accept your apology, Frank," I said finally. "Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve peace." He nodded, understanding the nuance of my response. "Are you happy, Celia? Really happy?" The question caught me by surprise, not because of its content, but because of the sincerity with which it was asked. I thought about the prosperous confectionery, about the 2 stores now managed by a competent team that included my own daughter. I thought about the radio program, about the letters I received, about the women who found inspiration in my story. I thought about Antonio, about the quiet, deep love we shared, about the house we were building together. I thought about the grandchildren growing up, about Sunday lunches, about small daily joys. "Yes," I replied with a certainty that came from deep in my soul. "I'm happier now than I ever imagined I could be." He smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "I'm happy for you, truly." When Frank said goodbye, there was no drama or resentment, just the quiet closure of a chapter that had been turned long ago. That night, I told Antonio about the unexpected visit. We were sitting on the porch of our new house, watching the sunset that painted Portland's sky with shades of orange and pink. "How did you feel?" he asked, always attentive to the nuances of my feelings. I reflected for a moment. "At peace," I finally replied, as if a circle had completely closed. There are no more loose ends, no unresolved issues, just acceptance that everything happened exactly as it should have happened. The following years brought new chapters, new challenges, new joys. In 2008, my first great-grandchild was born, a girl with the same curious eyes that Marianne had as a baby. In 2010, Christine expanded the confectionery concept, opening a third store with a different format, a confectionery school where we offered courses for professionals and amateurs. In 2012, at 66, I decided to gradually step away from the daily management of the stores, not out of exhaustion or inability, but from the desire to dedicate more time to other projects. The radio program had evolved into a broader format, now broadcast in several Oregon cities. I received invitations to speak at events focused on women's entrepreneurship, reinvention in maturity, overcoming personal challenges. Antonio accompanied me whenever possible, my loyal and loving companion. When he couldn't go, he waited at home with a dinner prepared by his own hands, now more skilled in the kitchen, eager to hear the details of each event. In 2015, we received the news that no one is prepared to hear. Antonio was diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer. The doctors were honest from the beginning. The prognosis wasn't favorable. We would have, with luck, a few months together. Those were, paradoxically, some of the most precious moments of our relationship. Each day gained special meaning. Each conversation, unique depth. Each touch, indescribable tenderness. We didn't waste time with lamentations or revolts against the inevitable. Instead, we concentrated our energies on fully living the time we had left. Antonio passed away on an October morning, serenely in our home, holding my hand. His last word was my name, whispered with so much love that I can still hear it in the quietest moments. The grief was deep, but different from the devastation I felt when Frank left me. There was no betrayal or rejection, just the natural pain of physical separation from someone deeply loved. Antonio had given me 8 years of true, respectful, nurturing love. He had taught me it was possible to love again, differently, but equally valid. In the months that followed, work was my refuge. I returned to frequenting the confectionery daily, not so much to manage, but to be present, to feel the warmth of the oven, the aroma of the sweets, the bustle of customers. I resumed the radio program, now also addressing topics like grief, new beginnings, the art of finding meaning in loss. In 2018, at 72, I received an unexpected invitation to write a book about my journey. At first, the idea seemed absurd to me. Who would be interested in the story of an ordinary lady who had simply lived her life the best way possible? But the publisher insisted. There was something universal in my journey, something that could resonate with people of all ages, especially women facing important transitions. I accepted the challenge. For a year, I dedicated myself to organizing my memories, reflecting on the lessons learned, finding words to express feelings that often seemed beyond language. The book, Sweet New Beginnings: How I Lost a Husband and Found Myself, was published in 2019 and, to my surprise, had a warm reception. The book signings were emotional moments where I met women, and some men, who identified with different aspects of my story. Some came after traumatic divorces, others after professional losses, still others seeking inspiration to start a new chapter after retirement or the departure of children from home. It was at one of these signings, in a bookstore in downtown Portland, that I ran into Amanda again. She was in line, holding my book, visibly nervous. When her turn came, she placed the book on the table and said in a low voice, "I don't know if you remember me." Of course I remembered. Her face was more mature, fine lines marked the corners of her eyes. Her hair was shorter and with some gray strands, but she was still unmistakably the woman who had once been in my husband's arms. "I remember, Amanda," I replied calmly. "How are you?" She seemed surprised by my tranquil reaction. "Fine, thank you. I I read your book twice, actually. It's extraordinary." I thanked her for the compliment, waiting for her to continue. There was something more she wanted to say. I could tell by the way she hesitated, how her fingers drummed nervously on the book's cover. "I wanted you to know that I've learned a lot from my mistakes," she said finally. "What I did to you, to your marriage, I have no excuses. I was young, selfish, but that doesn't justify it. I just hope you know that person isn't who I am anymore." I looked at her, really looked beyond the crystallized image I held in my memory. I saw a middle-aged woman carrying her own scars, seeking her own redemption. "We all evolve, Amanda," I replied as I signed her book. "We all deserve the chance to become better people." When I returned the book, I added, "You know, in retrospect, maybe I should thank you." She looked at me, confused. "Thank me?" If it weren't for that night at the office, I might never have discovered my own strength. I would never have opened the confectionery, written this book, touched the lives of so many people. Sometimes what seems like our biggest disaster ends up being our biggest gift. Tears glistened in her eyes. "You're extraordinary, Mrs. Celia." Now I understand why this book is touching so many people. That encounter, as unlikely as it was meaningful, was one more confirmation that life rarely follows a predictable script. The people who hurt us can become catalysts for our transformation. The endings we fear can be just the prelude to much richer beginnings. Today, at 78 years old, I look back with a mixture of astonishment and gratitude for the path traveled. The Celia's Sweets chain now has 5 stores, managed mainly by Christine, with the help of some grandchildren who showed interest in the business. The radio program transformed into a podcast, reaching an even wider audience. The book is in its 4th edition, and there are talks about a possible film adaptation. Something that makes me laugh at how surreal it seems. Frank passed away last year at 76, at peace with his family by his side. I was present at the funeral, not out of obligation, but out of respect for a shared history, for children and grandchildren we love, for decades that, despite everything, formed who I am today. I live alone now, by choice, in the same house I shared with Antonio. The rose garden he planted continues to flourish, cared for by my hands, which, though more wrinkled and less agile, still find joy in creating beauty, whether through flowers, words, or the sweets I occasionally still make for my great-grandchildren. Life taught me that there's no magic formula for happiness, no foolproof recipe for overcoming adversity. Each person has their own path, their own rhythm, their own ingredients. The important thing is to remember that no matter how painful the present moment is, it's just that, a moment. And moments pass, transform, make room for new possibilities. If there's one message I'd like to leave for you, my dears, who have followed my story this far, it's this. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to discover dormant talents, to cultivate new friendships, to open your heart to love, to find purpose and meaning. Life doesn't end with a divorce, a retirement, a loss. It just changes direction, offering new paths, new landscapes, new adventures. And now, as I close this account, I want to thank each of you who dedicated time to hear the story of a lady who simply refused to give up, who found in the crumbs of a broken heart the ingredients to create something new, something sweet, something truly her own. If my story touched your heart in some way, if it brought hope for a difficult moment, if it inspired a small step toward your own new beginning, then the whole journey was worth it. Because in the end, maybe that's what really matters. Not just the lives we live, but the lives we touch along the way. Until we meet again, my dears, always remember, the best chapter of your story may be exactly the one you haven't written yet. And wherever you are, find sweetness even in life's most bitter moments. With love, Celia. And before I say goodbye, my dears, don't forget to leave your like on this video, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel if you haven't already, and share this story with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over. Each like, each subscription, each comment makes me feel that my story was worth telling. Thank you so much for following me this far, and until the next video.